Well, there we are. I'm bringing to you a, a video lesson of the first week of this course. I'm going to share a presentation with you. It's not my intention to read the presentation from slide to slide to slide. You're able to pause the video and and read the material there at your leisure. But I'm going to explain the key points, if you like, to you. So with the presentation in front of you, I'm going to move to the corner of your screen, and that's where I'll remain until the end of this lesson. I've explained to you, if I've had the good fortune of being able to meet you in person, that the problem that I have and the university has as the educator is that you have little experience of business, and consequently it's going to make it really hard for me to teach you about what management is. And 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 this introduction is an attempt to set that right. And I intend doing so, as I've done in class and as I do with this video lesson, I intend doing so by explaining to you the origins of our species, because that gives you an idea of how our businesses in their contemporaneous form as we know them now have emerged. So the first step is just to acknowledge that our businesses are a reflection of our cultures, of our history. And 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 that is something which Professor Ian Morris does particularly well in his Foragers, Farmers, and Fossil Fuels book. So the he says, and I'll read this to you: humans have decisive advantages over the next most intelligent animal species, and our extra sophistication makes possible the invention and reinvention of culture. We develop complex systems of values, norms, expectations, and cultural patterns that sustain forms of cooperation that improve our chances of survival as our environment changes. And that's the key. The point is here that we've evolved as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, on the basis of our cooperation, our capacity for with our big brains for abstraction, and our cooperation and collaboration. The the deal here is that if we go back 10,000 years, the we will we would find in a time machine people dressed in clothing, but not we're not talking on point stuff here. We're saying skins and I doubt any fabric, but we would we would be happy. I expect we would hunt, we would fish, and we would eat berries off bushes. But the 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 problem is that we would spend most of our waking hours of the day simply getting enough food to eat. Morris refers to this as energy capture, and and this is the issue for any species, is the extent to which it is able to produce energy and consume energy in an efficient way. It it is the case that our our forefathers, the generations 100,000 years ago, moved out of Africa looking for food. They were looking for more bushes, basically more berries, and and that means that we have been foragers for most of our life here on Earth as a species. And the point is, we still forage, as these images you see in front of you now describe to you. Nothing has changed really, and a portion of our society survives this way. Now, it's not all doom and gloom and deprivation and sorrow, because the picture you see in front of you there is a business run in Pinetown, and Invest in Dignity is a foundation um, run by the lady you see in the middle of your screen here. And Tina is a wonderful woman who has created this non-profit organization which employs people um, to pick litter off the streets of Pinetown. Her business that she and her husband run then process that waste and turn it into plastic packaging. And what she has done is create opportunity for this community of people who are effectively helping to keep Pinetown clean. Farming, as we understand it, is something which which suggests that we are able to harness the energy available in the environment around us, um, and industrialize those berry bushes. And by industrializing berry bushes, I'm saying that we are able to 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 alter the gene pool around us. I find it fascinating that we are able to cultivate strains of wheat that are drought resistant and pest resistant. That is the most fascinating capability we have as a species. But once you have the capacity to tame your environment, to control it, it means that you tend to settle in larger groups. So my family of of 2 to 4 people, if we include my children, would probably not have foraged with more than another family's worth. But as farmers, we would group together in hamlets of 100 people, perhaps 1,000 people. If you put many farmers together in a food bowl of a city state, you would have vast communities, 10,000 people perhaps. And while that might pale in comparison to the many millions of people who live in eThekwini, for example, my point over here is that we tend not to move. I move as far as the university, and then I come back home, and that is the nature of life once we have tamed our agricultural environment. So that capacity is something which sets us apart. But what I would like to emphasize is this, and I'll read this to you because it's so fundamental. In foragers' mobile but tiny bands, the places change, but the faces stay the same. In farmers' static but big villages, the faces change, but the places stay the same. And that is a characteristic of agricultural life. So you would ask the question, maybe we should all be agriculturalists, and I'm going to respond and simply say, if we were all agriculturalists, how big should our farms be? I have in front of you here a snippet of a journal article dating back to 1941, and Robert Rudd and David McFarlane tell us that there's a unit of organization in every business, including a farm. So they said at the time, on the great wheat fields of California, the unit may be based upon the combined harvester and thresher. Okay, we're talking mechanization now. This machine and the crew to operate it, and the land and the men and other equipment required to raise that amount of wheat, which can be cut during the normal harvest period, may here make up the unit of organization. So what Rudd and McFarlane are saying is, if you have a combine harvester and a thresher, then that, together with a group of people, together with a chunk of land, which at a growing season can be harvested by this mechanization or agricultural machinery, that makes up a unit of organization. A big farm might have many units of organization, 2 combine harvesters, for example. But we're talking here of farmland. It's pricey. We're talking machines, they're pricey. We're talking about men, and there are minimum wages for them, and the money to keep this whole thing going. So what you're looking at there is a combine harvester. It's a very nice one. It's a John Deere. It's a 2009 model. I like it. But that would cost you 2 million rand right now. What, you say? Well, absolutely. What? Because the nature of farming is beyond my means and beyond your means in all probability. And what you and I are then reduced to is not using machinery, but using people, more men, as a generic term for men and women. And what you see over there is a fairly large cabbage field. How productive could you be? That looks like it could be anything from half an acre to perhaps a hectare of cabbages. We can't see the full frame. And I can tell you that at the sale price of cabbages, there's not an enormously good living to be made out of that. Certainly not in terms of paying out the profits to all of the people who might have worked that land. The land would also have to be freely available to all of those people as some sort of common. So what we see here is something which is a lot more effective, if you like, but it's no longer cooperative. What we're talking about is, I estimate, about 2 to 3 million rands worth of investment in a hydroponics tunnel and the filtration and pumping systems and piping required to move the food around the liquid fertilizer, and 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 that is probably beyond the reach of many people who have dreams of going into agriculture or starting a farm. So if we do start farms, we have to be realistic about the size of the farm we can start. I'm going to point out to you that that realism is attached to the factors of production, and we'll come to that in a second. So, and this is where you might pause the video lesson, for example, if you wanted to make a note of all of these. A farming business is a collection of resources. That's all it is. If any of the resources are lacking or deficient, like money, for example, an insufficiency of money means that the business is going to struggle. If it is a big farm, but it has an insufficiency of machinery, then there's also going to be a struggle. In other words, there's a level of balance or optimality. You have to get the scales just right to make this thing work. Capital or money is very often the limiting factor, but it's not the only one. And we must be cognizant or aware of the fact that there are many things that can slow an enterprise down and prevent it or prohibit it or preclude it from running well or profitably. So, from foraging to farming to industrialization, and Morris tells us that that industrialization was going to follow on the basis of the exploitation of fossil fuels. And what we were able to do is simply capture the sun's energy by exploiting the sun's energy as it's been fused into the soil in the form of natural gas or coal, and oil. And those minerals, much like every other mineral we can extract from the Earth's crust, is something which has allowed us to capture more energy. And it's accelerated very dramatically over the last 2 centuries. Morris draws a map and points out that he refers to it as this bonanza, that what we see over here is, look at that. We in the pale gray, we're looking at the West as we understand it. So this will be Europe and the Americas, and the East, which would be Japan, China, Vietnam, Korea, and Myanmar, and Pakistan. And he demonstrates for us that over the centuries, so 1,500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, to the present age, that energy capture in terms of utilizing fossil fuels was very nominal, but suddenly took off roundabout, what would you say? I'd say around 1800 or so. And that's the thing, you see, because it was at about 1800 or so that the first people who managed to exploit fossil fuels were going to do well. So he points out that this was something which happened in Northwest Europe. Now, Northwest Europe includes Germany and France and England and Spain, and you might want to consider it as including Portugal. And he adds that the industrialization of the 1800s was that there was a very abrupt change in the way the world worked, the way that profit was generated. So Britain, for example, was able to control sea routes and trading routes. And he points out 84% of the planet's land mass and 100% of its oceans. That is the most phenomenal thing. And there you see a map. I'm going to point out where England is for you so you can orientate. That's Great Britain there, and that is Ireland, and that is Scotland, and that is England over there, and a little bit of Wales tucked about there. Okay, and we have France, which in the old maps was Gaul, as you see here, and Belgium, and Germany, and Spain over here, and the great Africa right over here along the Mediterranean Sea, with Egypt sitting right here. So those trade routes were all active trade routes and demonstrate to you precisely how remarkable the nature of trade has been. I'm going to point out to you the origins of this map. When the Roman Empire was at its height, about 1,800 years ago. Phenomenal, not so? So that is our species. And the upshot of all of this is that trade as we know it, like buying a Spur burger, it's an exchange of goods. And if you can make more goods to sell, then you're onto a good wicket. And making lots of stuff and selling lots of stuff requires you to have more people to plant and to reap and to process, as I've written here, and to carry stuff around and to operate that combine harvester and to go out on the road in the Corollas to go and sell things, as well as the guys behind the counter serving customers. So all of that activity, all of those people, those resources have to be controlled and organized and planned and led, and that's what we call management. All right. So my intention is to clarify for you what our lives are about and to describe to you what a business is and what a manager is and how the two come together. The first step then is to give you a definition. And you see before you that a business is an arrangement of resources brought together with the intention of doing something. Now let's break that down a little bit, okay? If we're talking about an arrangement of resources brought together, what is this arrangement? Well, the arrangement can be just a guy, a sole proprietor. It can be a collection of guys in the form of a partnership, or it can be a company, which is a collection of guys with their money, because the guys don't really have anything to do with it. If I invest my pension into enterprise on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, I have nothing to do with the running of those firms, but I'm putting my money there. Okay, that's the way it works. So it's not just an arrangement, it's an arrangement of resources. Let's just pause for a moment. There are a number of ways we look at the resources of an enterprise, and the most popular of these is the M models. And I'm going to introduce to you the 5M model. But if you look long and hard enough at the worldwide interweb, you will find that there's a 3M model and a 4M model and a 6M model and a 7M model. We're just going to look at 5Ms over here. And it's a very useful way to contemplate that this is how a business is constructed. So if we're talking about an arrangement of resources, those resources are men, money, machines, materials, and methods. And you are simply going to have to commit that to memory. Not because there's going to be a test question which asks you to reproduce that, although there probably will be. It'll be an easy test question, won't it? But because your very understanding of business depends upon your getting a grasp of the essence, the fundamentals of business activity. So those resources is what every business comprises, okay? People, men and women, and money or capital, and machines or equipment, and materials, stuff that we convert into finished goods that you and I enjoy, like cows into burger patties to have it steers, and methods, production methods, intellectual property that says this is the way you can make a burger. You can make it a damn fine burger. And if you want to, you can even add pineapple to it, although I think that personally is a silly thing. So those arrangements of resources are brought together with intention. And we can look at that intention as finding its place in the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector, or civil society, as it's described over there. Again, you can pause that if you want to. My point is simply that all of those enterprise types, with their different intentions, all function according to a set of business principles and management principles which are common throughout. All right. So the intention is, as you see in bold type, the intention is to do something. What is it we do? Well, that something is what we can divide into primary activity, which is farming as we know it, agriculture, as well as fishing, which is a type of agriculture, and mining and forestry. And secondary activities, as we call it, which is basically factories or manufacturing, and trade activities, which is wholesale and retail, and then the people who support all of that, which we refer to as support activity. Okay. Oh, here's a question. Does this just work because we want it to work? Or does it work because there's something which obligates it to work? We write regulations. We write regulations to oversee our interaction as members of the human race, because otherwise we'd squabble. So there are laws, and laws of contract, as I've written there, of credit and association, people in companies. Remember, I put my capital into the company. How do I associate with the other people who've put capital into the company? And of employment and taxation and business behavior, which is what you study in third year, by the way, in your business ethics module. So making all of this stuff happen is what a manager is for. Okay, that's manager's activity you see right there. And that is the planning, leading, organizing, and controlling that we are going to study from week 3 or week 4, whatever it is of the program, as we walk away from just an overview of management and we start looking in detail at management. But I must point out to you that Mintzberg doesn't actually agree with that. And Mintzberg says, you know what, I prefer to see the manager as someone who has an interpersonal role to play. He wears an interpersonal, or she wears an interpersonal hat, and an informational role, or an informational hat, and a decisional role, or decisional hat. The issue being that interpersonal roles are about the way you interact with other people, and these informational roles are about the way you get or collect information, and that clearly is about making the decisions that count, because you're a manager and you're expected to make the decisions. So there's different types of decisions you can make. You make the decisions, I beg your pardon, you make the decisions as the person with the genius that makes a business work. You fix problems and conflicts. You make decisions with regard to where the resources have got to go, and you negotiate transactions. Gathering and disseminating information speaks for itself, and the interpersonal roles are about what we enjoy out of people we admire. They inspire us, they motivate us, they make us feel good about ourselves. And that interpersonal role is something which many managers occupy with great discomfort, because they don't make people feel good, they make them feel bad. Now, I don't know what sort of manager you'll be one day, if you become a manager ever, but I do want you to think about what your role as a manager will be. It's a question to which we'll return, but I'm going to point out to you that in the slide deck, which is available to you on the middle page as well, and in this video lesson, you can pause this lesson to look at these things in more detail. But you and I are not going to waste our time going through that over here, because you don't want me speaking it to you for hours and hours, reading a PowerPoint deck to you. What I am going to show you is that we can distinguish levels of management as low level or junior management, middle and senior management, or top management as it's called there. And you have some titles. Now, the thing is, if they are indeed these levels of management, then we have to say, well, what activity do they perform at those different levels? And I'm going to say to you, the same activity, because everyone over here is performing the orange, pink activity, and the green activity and the blue activity. But do you see how the proportions change? A supervisory manager, a junior leader, does not spend an enormous amount of time conceptualizing. Similarly, a senior manager doesn't spend a lot of time on technical stuff. I remember a general manager I had from many years ago who had the only color screen of a computer in the whole organization. And his secretary used to switch it on for him in the morning so that there would be this color thing with a Windows logo on it, because it was impressive. But we are talking over here about the early 1980s. And the rest of us had green screens and amber screens and black and white screens. They really weren't in the same league at all. But the point is, he didn't have to worry about working with a computer with Excel, for example, as I did. He had to worry about conceptual skills. And I, on the other hand, at the bottom of the organization, didn't do much conceptual thinking, but did a lot of technical stuff and interacted with people because of the nature of my job. So this is another thing where I'm going to say what you might find easier here than reading in the book. I've broken down technical skills on this slide, followed by conceptual skills on the next one, and human or interpersonal skills. And I'm going to ask you to pause the video at those points so that you can look at those things in great detail. But in summary, that's what they're about. Technical skills are the job-specific skills required to do a job. Human skills refer to the ability to get people to do what needs to be done. And conceptual skills are the skills of those people who can almost read the future. And those tend to be senior people in an organization, as you see over here. In other words, the top guys, the top boy. Typically, there's not more than one person who's top of the organization. And do you see that all of these levels of manager, junior, middle, and senior, are performing different activities or working in different functions in the organization, but all of them are engaged in those activities because it's necessary to perform all of those activities to get the job done. Right. Within that understanding, I'm going to say, let's introduce you to some more concepts, because that's what the first chapter of the book does. And it's the first chapter of every management textbook, by the way. It's not solely the Jones and George. We talk about competency, and you at university to develop a cognitive competency and a limited technical competency. If we teach you research, for example, it's a technical competency. But the big thing is we want you to be able to sift information and pick out that which is important and discard that which is irrelevant in order to make decisions. It's what you do at university. So with that in mind, we introduced you to restructuring and outsourcing and empowerment as activities in any business. And the textbook then finally gets around to saying, but there are certain things that you just have to be able to confront when you're running a business. And those things are constructs. Now, if construct is a new word for you, I'm going to say that's the way we define it. It's an idea or theory, like a bucket, basically. A construct is a bucket of elements, conceptual elements or thought elements. And when we talk about competitive advantage, for example, we define it like this: the ability of one organization to outperform another because it just does things better than the other. And innovation is then regarded as being an essential component of that. In other words, you like loud and proud and vibey and whatever we define innovation as. And I'm going to say, never mind that. My simple definition for you is that competitive advantage arises because you do things better, faster, nicer, or cheaper than competitors. And I think that little rhyme, better, faster, nicer, cheaper, is going to serve you well in terms of understanding what makes some companies perform better than others. So we introduced you here to innovation and efficiency and quality and customer intimacy or responsiveness, as it's written over here. We're introduced in your textbook to turnaround management or fixing stuff which is broken. And the book gives you an example. The book says that Steve Jobs, the guy who was one of the co-founders of Apple, was great at turnaround management. And he was when he was re-employed by Apple after he'd been fired by it. because the firm did fire him. They said, "You're just not compatible with us, Steve, so get out." And he was out for a while, and they re-employed him, and he did rather well at restoring Apple's position, if you like, in the hierarchy of world leading firms. But I do find it to be a fragmented example, so I'm not going to give you many more of those. Right. We talk about ethical and socially responsible standards, and we talk about managing diverse workforces, and we talk about utilizing new technologies. And I think that's critical, which is why I'm going to stick around on this slide, because the point here is simply that every business has 4 parts to it. You can sometimes count 5 or 6, but you will understand those because you'll see this again as you study management. You will see the bottom and the top, all right? It's worthwhile drawing the distinction, even if it doesn't seem so at the moment, because it resurrects as a concept called Porter's value chain, which you will talk about in the 3rd year. But for now, just recognize that stuff below that thick red line is marketing and operations. They are the primary activities of a business. And P for personnel or people and F for finance is above the line. That's because these are support activities, while these are primary or core activities. Okay? In the middle of all of this is this IT backbone. And you can see there's a backbone when I draw the spines joining every function of the business together, either by Bluetooth, but usually with coax cable through hubs, and those are those computer bits that you see in the corridors of the university with flashing lights. The flashing lights are simply indicating that there's message being trafficked across that coaxial cable. So what is the big deal about computers? You are what we refer to as a digital native. Personal computers were introduced when I was in matric. And I first saw a real computer in a computer lab at the university in 1982. And I used them in 1982 and 1983 because that's what the courses demanded. And in 1984, no course demanded that we use a computer, and therefore in 1984 I didn't use a computer. I would say that since that point in time, I probably spend 5 hours a day using a computer to do my knowledge work as a knowledge worker. Fascinating, that, isn't it? Computers help us because they're fast, accurate, and reliable. Don't ever forget that. Fast, accurate, and reliable. And they do very limited functions, but they're so useful. They capture data. Much like you trying to commit all of this to memory, computers can do it, but they actually do remember because they store it. And you know that you and I sometimes don't store the stuff that we read. They transfer data. I'm transferring data to you now by having this conversation. They manipulate data or alter it or change it or switch it up, and they report data. And that's what management is all about. It's about making decisions, that decisional role, remember. But they should be evidence-based decisions. And computers help us in so many ways to generate performance data about how our organizations are running. Your book also talks about global crisis management and addresses these issues here. Teams, and that implies, I think, that we're going to have to talk about teams when we talk about leadership, and about an organizational chain of command or chain of leadership, and the right sort of people to make all of this work, and bargaining and negotiating strategies finally to manage the conflicts which inevitably arise. Now, we see a bit of conflict to the north of us in Europe, and what you see in front of you here circled in red is the zone of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Russia is an extraordinary one. It straddles both Europe and Asia. Excuse me. And it believes that the Ukraine should really be part of Russia. The line that you see dividing those two continents are the Caucasus Mountains. So it is more geographic than it is about the people that straddle that. And Russia does believe, and I think we need to home in on this area more closely, Russia does believe that the Ukraine really is historically part of Russia. So there's the area in red again. And what you see now is the Ukraine over here, which I'm circling in red for you, and Russia over here. Okay? And Russia has marched into Kiev and said, we want this place for us, and you guys have to do what we say. And the Ukrainians are fighting against that, and it's one of those sad things. But the point of all of this is that it's caused a bit of a global crisis, in so much as that the world's grain has grown in the Ukraine and Russia, and all of Europe's natural gas tends to come from Russia. That is a bit of a dilemma. It is one I don't want to dwell on because it's unpleasant news, but I'm going to emphasize these three things you see here: output, efficiency, and quality. You can't fight a war and have lots of output. You can't fight a war and expect to be efficient. And you cannot fight a war and expect that what you do in your factory or your business is going to be of high quality, that it's going to be effective. So a very useful picture for you that I've clipped over here. And I'm going to ask you to dwell on this by pausing the presentation and to contemplate how those 5 M's form part of a value-adding activity where they are altered into finished goods, and that gives rise, if they are sold, to a certain performance, which has effects on customers, if you like. There's a relationship between productivity and efficiency, which affects those things there, and effectiveness, which affects those things there. Performance and effects. If it's too complex for you, then simply say, well, are they things I need to be aware of? Well, yes. If a business is not productive, what happens? If it is not efficient, what happens? And if it is not effective, what happens? And the textbook does go into some level of detail over here. And I suggest that you pause the video and you look at the page in the textbook and you spend some time on that. So how do we avoid those issues? We avoid those issues with good management. And if we get that right, then we're okay. If we get it wrong, then we're in big trouble.